This year, Pedro Pascal was crowned the internet's daddy, and it spread like wildfire, from lovable memes to increasingly graphic thirst tweets.
But more than that, the mainstream media eagerly took up the baton and started bringing it up in interviews and in any media coverage he appeared in.
So is this just a bit of harmless fun, or is it a new form of objectification?
And how do we know where the line is between appreciating male sexuality and aggressive sexual objectification?
Let's go straight to the comments. Before we get into talking about Pedro Pascal, we'd just love to ask you, if you're enjoying the show, if you could leave us a 5-star review on Spotify. So you just tap the 5 stars if you think we're worth 5 stars. And also if you could leave us a review on Apple, it would be really appreciated. Thank you and enjoy the episode.
So Pedro Pascal has been around for a while now, and he played Oberyn Martell in Game of Thrones and Javier Peña in the Netflix crime series Narcos. But since starring in The Mandalorian and with the release of HBO's The Last of Us this year, he's suddenly just become everywhere. Yeah. And he was even at this year's Met Ball. And Lisa, you're a fan of him on The Last of Us, aren't you?
Yeah, you well know that. And I kept talking about it. But yeah, I do love it. And I have to admit, I've got a bit of a crush on him, especially in The Last of Us.
You know, and as we said, he is just everywhere at the moment. But in case anyone doesn't know who he is, probably no one, but just in case, Lisa, why don't you give us a brief intro on who he is?
Absolutely. So Pedro Pascal is a 47-year-old Chilean-born American actor who's been acting for almost 30 years. And he took small roles for many years, including on Buffy the Vampire Slayer and most of the Law & Order franchises. He's spoken before how many roles he missed out on and how long it took for him to get his big break. And he said this: "I had to let go of so many ideas I had about what the pursuit of this career was going to be. It's like a child's fantasy. There were so many opportunities. The close call started early for me, but it didn't pan out. You find yourself suddenly in your mid-30s and can't live off the next Broadway show."
And alongside this recent meteoric rise, he's recently been associated with a meme where he's referred to as the internet's daddy. Mm-hmm. And in January this year, an Entertainment Tonight reporter asked him on the red carpet, "You know you're the daddy of the internet, right?" And then he showed him a tweet that a fan had penned about him being a sort of cool, slutty father, to which he responded, "I am your cool, slutty daddy." And it's now become almost the only thing that anyone wants to ask him about. So, for example, there was one tweet that picked up on this that said, "Pedro Pascal hiding in the bathroom at red carpet so he doesn't get asked about being the internet's daddy for the 152,636,476th time."
Oh my goodness, I can't believe you managed to say that. That was a lot of times.
Yeah, that's a lot of numbers there.
Yeah. You're right, Sarah, because, you know, when he went on the Graham Norton show in February, Norton asked him if he was enjoying all the sudden attention, to which he replied he was, with an eyebrow raise and a smile. And then Graham Norton said, "What's the internet's daddy?" And Pascal replied, "Me."
So he's definitely aware of this phenomenon himself, and he's even leaned into it, you could say. And TikTok, which I'm not on, but it seems to have been one of the places it's really blown up. Yeah. So there was a fan cam edit of Pedro Pascal that went viral on January the 20th. And it earned its creator millions of likes and more than 30 million streams, which is a lot. But Lisa, why is everyone calling him daddy? What's that about?
I mean, I know that's why we wanted to do this episode. We wanted to dig into this, you know. Well, the actor's daddy status seems to come, I think, from the fact that he's played a couple of father roles, well, very iconic father roles. He plays the Mandalorian himself, who becomes the protector and caretaker of a young Grogu. I hope I said that right. And in The Last of Us, Pascal's Joel is a grieving dad over his daughter Sarah, and he also becomes a sort of pseudo-parent to the orphaned Ellie. So I think that's where it's originating from, that he plays so many father figures.
Although ironically, he doesn't actually have any children himself. And he addressed that by saying, "Daddy is a state of mind. You know what I'm saying? I'm your daddy." Yeah. And in The Cut, they actually described his appeal as, "Pascal is the platonic ideal of a leading man in a post-Brad Pitt world. He is consistently likable without being smarmy, comfortable without being too cavalier. He'll share bits of himself that don't feel like a stilted media-trained anecdote. For example, did you know he used to be a go-go dancer? He will play along with whatever an interviewer throws at him while seemingly remaining sincere."
I really agree with that. That's the kind of vibe I'm getting from him whenever I pick up on some content with him. But when they say daddy, it's like, what we got to get clear, it's not about being literally a father figure, right?
No, and that's the bit that confuses me a bit more, is that sort of daddy has become, it's definitely become synonymous with sex and not just being a parent. And it's mainly used these days as synonymous with an attractive man of an older age. But I mean, we're going to come back to this and we're going to sort of briefly go over the history of daddy as a sexual term later. But why is Pedro Pascal in particular associated with this term? And what kind of comments are there out there about him in this respect?
Well, I'm going to take you through quite a spectrum of online comments about him, starting from the sort of tame to the most extreme. Let's start by saying there's a lot of warmth towards him. For him as a whole person, like you said with your comment earlier in the cut, people really like so much about his whole personality, the whole package. On Instagram, he comes across like such a beautiful human being, gorgeous certainly, but such a lovely man. And someone else said, I'm always struck by how intelligent, humble, and genuine Pedro is, because he had to struggle and persevere for so many years of making it big. What an inspiration. And then finally, I just want to go dancing with Pedro. So they're on the more tame end.
Yeah. And I totally get that. And especially if he has been a go-go dancer, he's probably very good at it.
Yeah, yeah.
He just looks fun and, cheeky but respectful, which I think is a nice line to have.
Exactly. And a lot of people comment that actually when he meets fans, he leans in but always keeps his hands in his pockets. He's never too much.
Yeah.
But the temperature then just goes up a little bit, Sarah. Are you ready for it?
Yeah,
with people
okay.
openly lusting after him. On a Pedro Pascal Instagram fan account, there is this caption to a picture where he has his sort of back turned, pulling up his jeans. And then the caption is, just imagine slowly running your hands down his back. And then someone responded, they say stop sexualizing him, and there we go. And then the author says, my bad. And then someone else wrote, why does he have so many slutty photos? I love them all. Then it sort of goes off the scale. This week, a promotional image dropped on Twitter of him and Ethan Hawke sort of in an embrace. And it's for their film, The Strange Way of Life, directed by Pedro Almodovar. They play lovers, and people were saying on Twitter, this was a sort of exchange on Twitter. First person said, drop the sex tape and maybe we'll watch. The other person responded, Pedro already did it with me yesterday. And the other person said, how was it? And the person said back, I'm in a wheelchair now.
Oh, God. Yeah, I mean, that's going a bit far.
But this is like, you'll find a lot of this. It just really escalates quickly, like with the graphic things they'd like to do to him.
Or have him do to them.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But what's interesting is how the mainstream media treat Pascal. You know, he kind of like, did you see him at the Met Gala?
Yeah, he was wearing an outfit with, it was very red, but they were quite short shorts that he was wearing.
Yeah, and it was strange because you had everyone going up the red carpet or the white carpet. And Vogue, E! News, Entertainment Tonight, they all tweeted quite quickly when he hit the carpet, all saying, well, here comes the internet's daddy. And then the cut, again, even tagged him as, here comes the cool slutty daddy. And a lot of people have reacted in a positive way to this, as if they're enjoying the in-joke these media outlets are making about him. But a few objective, and they said, E! News, you need to act like professional. This man is much more than being diminished by you guys as a daddy in every interview. And then someone else said, weird caption for a professional news outlet. But I just wanted to say, what do you think of a professional news outlet calling him this?
Well, I mean, it's a little bit creepy and pandering, to be honest, especially at this point. And at this point, it's also really unoriginal. So as someone said on Reddit, what they said was, I do wish journalists would ask him more questions about his projects rather than internet memes and thirst tweets, though. It's such lazy journalism, too. The whole daddy thing has been beaten to death already.
Mm-hmm.
And someone else tweeted, I think the popularity of celebrities read thirst tweets videos has contributed to how comfortable certain entertainment journalists have become with ambushing famous men and saying weird sexual shit to them under the guise of, oh my God, aren't the fans so funny? It's very odd.
Yeah, and what's interesting is the mixed reaction to his daddy status online. On the Mail Online, a comment said, I don't get the daddy stuff, though. The last thing I want to read about is my dad, LMAO, which is, I have to still know that is laugh my ass off. I still have to remind myself what that means. And then people jump in and say, well, actually, he's all smiling and stuff, knowing damn well his fandom is feasting on these looks. I'll have more leg, please. And for the sake of time, I won't go into any more of the comments, but there are broadly in two camps. There is the harmless fun, and Pascal started it. And then there's other people coming out and saying, like you said earlier, why are the media driving this? This is not right.
Yeah, exactly. It really has sort of snowballed at this point. But as you read with your spectrum of comments, all the comments are not created equal, so to speak, are they?
you're right. Some of these posts seem just like people with a celebrity crush, which is, I think, very normal.
Mm.
And we all have our celebrity crushes, but some seem to me much more extreme and essentially objectifying him. And that's the question I think I have, which is, how do we differentiate? What's the line, and how do we know when it's crossed into objectification?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question and something that a lot of people struggle with. And I'm just going to briefly start with a definition of objectification to put it in context. So, as the name suggests, it's the act of treating a person or a group as an object or a thing. And it's part of dehumanization, so reducing people just to their parts. And in this way, the object exists for the sole purpose of the viewer's wants and needs without regard for the individual or the group's own agency. And then, as an extension of that, you also have fetishization,
Mm-hmm.
which can be thought of as the act of making someone an object of sexual desire, specifically, but based on some aspect of their identity. So, for example, just their race or just their size, or just their feet. I don't know. Um, and interestingly, there was an Ask a Feminist forum on Reddit, and someone asked, can someone explain to me the difference between physical attraction and sexual objectification? And
Ooh.
some of the comments were quite succinct in describing this. And one of the comments was physical attraction is Sally is pretty. I know Sally has other qualities too. I care about her wants, needs, and who she is as a person. And objectification is Sally is pretty. Her value comes entirely from being pretty. I don't care about her wants, needs, or who she is as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And there was another one who summed it up as, in short, you can be sexually attracted to someone while still viewing them as a sentient human being with thoughts and emotions, who is as deserving as respect as someone you wouldn't have sex with.
They're fantastic definitions. That's really helped me actually get a bit of a clearer picture on it,
Mm.
And I suppose this is where it starts to feel that some people have definitely crossed over into the objectification with this daddy meme with Pedro Pascal.
Yeah.
It even seems to be one of the main things brought up in the interviews now, and that the media are actually fueling it as much as the fans. For example, in March, in a red carpet interview for the current season of The Mandalorian, Access Hollywood asked Pascal to read thirst tweets about himself, similar to the popular Buzzfeed YouTube series where celebrities read thirst tweets to the camera.
And I'm just going to jump in here and say I do want to come back to the whole thirst tweets thing in a bit.
Definitely, but when he was asked to read the third tweets, Pascal politely declined. And someone tweeted in response, I can't imagine having red carpet access only to make an actor uncomfortable by putting him in a sexual situation he didn't accept like that. I thirst Pedro like we all do, but the way he's being reduced to this instead of, maybe asking about his work. And then she added, when Latinos still only make up 6% of all speaking roles, reducing Pedro to sexual feelings others have for him is even more increasingly frustrating.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting aspect that I hadn't actually thought about at all. To what extent is him being Latino part of this sexualization? Is it actually a fetishization? And I mean, I don't know really, because I'd imagine there are maybe a lot of people who just specifically fancy him. So it's really hard to know exactly what role that plays. But it is a good point that I hadn't even thought of.
Mm-hmm.
And more and more people, as we've mentioned, are starting to call out this obsession with this meme. So on Reddit, someone said, imagine having everyone you meet bring up the daddy thing. He's a saint, because I would have snapped long ago. Yeah,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah.
And another said, it's funny when one person says it, less funny when hundreds of fans are obnoxiously screaming it at you. I feel very bad for him, and I'm getting hardcore secondhand embarrassment for the internet.
Mm.
And I think that is a good point, is there's a critical mass. It's like a joke.
Mm-hmm.
One person says it, but when you hear it like 20 times a day, it's like, oh God, I'm over this now.
Yeah.
And just to put into context why we're even talking about objectification and why it's important, studies have actually shown that exposure to sexual objectification has been linked with depression. It's been linked with eating disorders and low self-confidence. It's been shown that it can disrupt the development of a healthy sexual identity. And sexual objectification of women has been found to negatively affect women's performance, confidence, and level of position in the workplace.
Oh, absolutely. But objectification isn't just confined to women, though, is it?
No, I mean, it's talked a lot in relation to women, but male objectification has definitely increased over the years. So in 2013, male sexual objectification was found in 37% of advertisements featuring men's body parts to showcase a product. And although that's still less than women, it's definitely been shown to be on the rise.
Mm.
And within gay male communities, male objectification has been found to be even higher. But as with the reference to adverts, the media in Hollywood, they definitely seem to be one of the main places where you can witness objectification most at work. It's the most obvious place that we can see it in our daily lives.
Exactly. And I mean, Hollywood has been using sex symbols as a marketing strategy since the early days of the industry, you know, thinking of Marilyn Monroe. But male actors have also been subjected to objectification and sexualization, but it's not always been as openly obvious as with women.
Yeah.
Back in the day, you know, even back in the silent era, actors such as Rudolph Valentino was sort of fetishized, and he played sort of exotic figures like Matador to Shake. And his sudden death reportedly caused a complete outbreak of female hysteria.
Oh,
And
wow.
yeah, and when you think of the 1940s and early 50s, maybe that you had the sword and sandal movies featuring ripped sort of American actors like Kirk Douglas not wearing many clothes, followed, you know, by the obsession of over heartthrobs like James Dean and Marlon Brando in the 50s. So it's always been there. But then you think about it, when we had, like, going back to when we were growing up in the 80s and 90s, we had the sort of Arnold Schwarzeneggers and Sylvester Stallones, you know, sort of hyper masculine men, often portrayed as quite aggressive and ridiculous, but I never really fancied them.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's all the action films of the 80s and 90s, and it's weird because I did slightly fancy Sylvester Stallone, and then later Vin Diesel,
Yeah.
more because of the film Pitch Black than the Fast and the Furious stuff. But
Okay.
I think, you know, this is embarrassing to admit, I think I just like the idea of a big guy who could pick me up because I'm 5'11", and, you know, we've mentioned many times I'm
Yeah.
not tiny. I think that appealed to me to a certain extent
Yeah.
while I was growing up, and that sort of, oh, being rescued by a man, which, you know.
Oh, it goes right back to Tarzan, right? I was thinking I wanted to
Yeah,
be rescued out of the
exactly.
jungle. And, you know, it's really strange because I had such a crush on Andrew McCarthy from Mannequin, and I used to play that song, Nothing's Gonna Stop Us Now, the video, repeatedly because I adored him so much. And I just wanted to be the
Yeah.
mannequin. I mean, really. It was actually Kim Cattrall. And then I a little bit fancied Tom Cruise. But when I started watching his, I don't know, Top Gun when I was in my early teens, I didn't really pick up on all the gay undertones. I didn't understand he was being really pushed as a sex symbol. But you can definitely say there were male sex symbols back in the day.
Oh, definitely, and I think, you know, in my teen years, you've already mentioned Tom Cruise. There were 2 that were really massive at the top for that,
Yeah.
and it was, are you a Tom Cruise girl or a Brad Pitt girl? That seemed to be, I remember that being the sort of main choice of the ultimate pinup, which was interesting because
Mm.
for me, it was never those 2, it was actually Keanu Reeves, long before
Oh,
this new
yeah.
renaissance for him.
Yeah.
So you can imagine, like, when Interview with a Vampire came out, I think people just lost their shit because they were like, "We've got both of them.
It's
What
too
more do you
much.
want?"
Yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
know.
And there was wasn't who was this
Oh,
actor? Antonio Banderas.
Christian
I was
Slater
gonna
as
say, well,
well.
but that also had
It was just
Antonio.
like all of the heartthrobs in
Yeah, they
one
just squeeze him in
movie.
every movie. Yeah.
But as you know, I actually grew up a lot on classic films, black and white films, and the not always black and white, but the classic films, Golden Hollywood. And weirdly, you know, I mentioned Sylvester Stallone, but I didn't have a specific type, so to speak. But my first crushes were actually James Mason, Fred Astaire, and Cary Grant, which
Ooh.
for someone growing up in the 80s and 90s, I suppose that's a little, I was a bit of a weird child, I don't know. Um, but for me, it was definitely a lot less about their bodies, but their charisma, their suaveness, the elegant suits, and, you know, for Fred Astaire, the dance skill. I just wanted to dance with him. I think it was a really innocent
Oh.
crush when I was a kid. And I just loved their abilities. And there was something about that that was so appealing to me.
Yeah, and I totally get the Cary Grant theme because I remember I watched him so many times in different films, especially with Doris Day. I can't remember the name of it now, but
Mm,
That Touch of Mink, that was it. And he's always playing those suave, very sort of knows himself and confident. And I think
yeah.
what's interesting, when I started looking into this, I found this film scholar called Richard Dyer, and he did a lot of analysis of like the marketing and the kind of way they position male film stars in Hollywood. And he said what the important thing is that when it comes to sort of marketing them, is that you focus more on their abilities and being active, and that in the sort of classic sort of film publicity shots, men were often staring off camera and deflecting the gaze, where women were seen as passive and directly inviting the gaze. So this is an important part of it, is about sort of not being seen actively to sort of want to be looked at.
Yeah, and I mean, we've mentioned Brad Pitt. He was a huge symbol, especially when Thelma and Louise came out. It was just all about his abs. He really took off. he would often try and deflect being seen as someone who was lusted after, and he'd go out of his way to look rough, and he even said, being a sex symbol all the time hampers my work. And this is definitely a common trend among male actors, including Leonardo DiCaprio. He's also said in an interview, being dubbed as a hunk sort of annoys me. It gives me a yucky feeling. But do we have leading men like we used to? It definitely still feels like the role of the masculine leading man has changed a lot in the more recent years. There's definitely a lot more space for diversity and not being pigeonholed just into that sort of romantic leading man status. And if I think about it, I mean, we've mentioned Cary Grant, but it feels like in the same category as Cary Grant, that George Clooney is almost the last of these leading men in that particular vein.
That's so true. I mean, you've got like the Chris Hemsworths, but he's sort of, who I really fancied in Thor, but he only exists really in the Marvel universe. And then you seem to have like this sort of roster of sort of more boyish stars like Timothée Chalamet and Robert Pattinson. I mean, and we did have that brief return to sort of hypermasculinity with sort of Jared Butler in 300, look at all the muscles and beards. And there's sort of Jason Statham, but they're almost like A-list actors in B movies.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. And it seems clear that we've moved into a new era of Hollywood male stars because masculine ideals are a lot less specifically defined in our current society. And as a result of that, I think a lot of people crave a new breed of men, those who embody masculinity, vulnerability, and self-awareness all in one, which is where I think Pedro Pascal comes in. He's seen as the best of both worlds, the masculine and the vulnerable.
I mean, millions can be riding on Hollywood stars, and as they say, sex sells. Many of us have seen them on the promo rounds doing press junkets and being interviewed on the red carpet, and really they're just being reduced a little bit to sound bites and viral clips. Scarlett Johansson has had her fair share of attention of being a sex symbol. Do you remember when that reporter felt her boob up on the red carpet?
Yeah, it was what, the early 2000s? It was just, I mean, I can't comment enough about how inappropriate it is. This isn't someone she knew, right? And he just pounced right.
Yeah, he said he was checking
Yeah.
the padding of her bra, but it sort of then again came a viral moment. And then in May 2021, Scarlett Johansson has called on her fellow actors to take a step back from the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, the organisation behind the Golden Globes, as she slammed the sexist questions and remarks she's received from its members. She said, as an actor promoting a film, one is expected to participate in awards season by attending press conferences as well as award shows. In the past, this has often meant facing sexist questions and remarks by certain HFPA members that bordered on sexual harassment. It's the exact reason why I, for many years, refused to participate in their conference.
Yeah, I mean, she's really over it. And you can see sort of collections of video clips where she's been asked in press junket questions and she always calls them out. She's like, why are you asking me this question? And, she's not the only one. There's been quite a lot of actresses who've pointed that this has predominantly in the past been directed towards women, that there is a double standard. So, for example, I remember recently seeing a clip of Cate Blanchett calling out a red carpet photographer. She, they do the whole, what are you wearing? And he panned down her dress and she just sort of bends down to where the camera's going and says, I mean, would you do that to a man? But what do you think's going on down there?
Yeah.
And but it does seem like it's now starting to happen more and more to men. So there was a tweet that said, I feel like Pedro Pascal is getting the actress treatment where he can't go to any interview without being sexualized. It's wild. And then they also highlighted this in response to him wearing shorts at the Met Gala. So there was a comment on Daily Mail that said, Pedro and his slutty little knees, he's giving his fans what they want, and that's why they call him daddy.
What? Like, I read a lot of comments, but slutty little knees?
Yeah, that's a first. Yeah.
Okay, that's really, I mean, that's starting to get really out of control. But okay, let's go back and explore this whole daddy thing again. Where does the whole daddy term come from and why is it considered so sexual?
Well, I mean, it was really interesting doing some research on this because I hadn't known that much about it before, but actually there are records from the early 17th century that show that the word daddy has been used for any controlling an older figure regardless of biology. So, as early as 1621, there's evidence of daddy being used by prostitutes to refer specifically to their pimps. And then daddy sort of became a slang for male lover, and that's been found in the early 1900s. And then in the 1970s, the gay community really took up the word for the leather subculture
Mm-hmm.
with the term leather daddy. And they later just dropped the word leather. And it definitely has associations of power and dominance, and that comes in from the BDSM communities. This sexualization of daddy terminology, I mean, it's spawned various other iterations, from sugar daddies, which we mentioned last week,
Mm-hmm.
to DILFs, which is short for dad I'd like to fuck, like a MILF. And then there's the Latin-inspired pappy. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but you hear it a lot in J-Lo songs, like I pappy kind of thing. And then
Yeah.
there's this mysterious zaddy, so daddy with a Z. And apparently that comes from a Thai dollar sign song. And what it means is a man with swag who is attractive and also fashionable. I mean, had you ever heard of zaddy before? And what do you think of these terms?
No, but and it's strange now because because I love so much R&B music. I've been hearing Daddy for years,
Yeah.
and call my name Daddy and all this stuff, and
Yeah.
but I've never really thought really hard why.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to hear where it's sort of coming from.
Totally. And so for me, I'm British. And even as an adult, I would often alternate between calling my dad dad or daddy, just completely normally. So I really, really personally don't like associating the word daddy with being sexual because, you know,
Hmm.
it's just my dad. Like, I don't want to, go, that's, anyway. And I don't know whether it's more of a Brit thing to call parents daddy, legitimately. Maybe it's less used in America, so it doesn't feel like such a crossover. I don't know. But I'm also maybe I was a bit too innocent, but I'm, for the longest time when I'd hear people say, "Who's the daddy?" because that's a phrase you do hear around.
Mm.
I just thought it meant like who's the boss, who's in charge, or who's the winner. I didn't think it was a sexual thing. Um, and I'm definitely not the only person who's struggling with the use of daddy being a sexual thing. So, for example, there was a comment that said, the whole daddy and mommy thing just weirds me out. The same generation that is so progressive and awesome about consent, justice for victims of sexual assault, and being anti paedophilia also uses daddy as fun slang when talking about a guy they find super hot and are lusting after. Just ew. Think about what you're saying.
Yeah, it's so strange. Like I don't really get it. And taking out the specific daddy thing, the open sexualization of male celebrities, is that any different really from sexualizing women? I mean, there is a double standard here.
Yeah, and this brings me back to the thirst tweets that we mentioned earlier, and I said I wanted to come back to. I mean, they've really taken off in recent years. Buzzfeed brought them out in 2018. And what it involves for anyone who hasn't seen them are their videos of predominantly male actors reading quite extreme tweets about themselves when
Mm.
they haven't seen before, and then they have to read them out. And for example, Shawn Mendes had to read, "I'd let Shawn Mendes father every single egg in my non-existent uterus, Lord." And he was quite
Oh,
uncomfortable with that, I think, when he read it. And
yeah.
that was actually mild in comparison to some of the other really thirsty tweets that I've seen, which are actually explicitly violent, particularly in a masochistic way towards the men. They describe in really great detail what the person wants the celebrity to do to them. It's usually quite violent. But as you can imagine, if a woman was asked to read these out, it would be considered very degrading. And an article on the Swaddle sort of sums up this disparity, and it says, objectification of a man is viewed radically different because of the existing power inequalities in our society. A man's agency is much less likely to be overridden by a woman, and a woman lusting after a man isn't inherently perceived as a threat. In addition to that, the men are just expected to laugh it off or play along, and that's what's expected societally. So, for example, they also said, there are millions and millions of views on these videos just to see celebrities get queasy in their chairs, get uncomfortable, but not uncomfortable enough to vocalize it, just enough to joke about it. There is an unspoken expectation of all these men to just embrace the discomfort and only identify as a high-fiving alpha male who prioritizes sexual desirability as the ultimate quality in a man.
That's interesting. Well, even though there is this difference in power dynamic, I think there's also an aspect of some people just want it to swing back the other way in this sort
Mm.
of post-Me Too world. They would argue that women have been sexualized and objectified for so long that doing it, the same back to men is somehow evening the playing field.
Yeah, it's like they've taken this sort of tit for tat approach, or in this particular case, tat for tit, I would say. But yeah. But I think that kind of misses the point entirely. And it does seem like there has been a greater amount of openly sexually objectifying men in the mainstream now. Because, I mean, it was always around, but it's really become much more mainstream. So maybe there's even more of a demand for it, you could say. So when you think of the films like Magic Mike, some people have argued that it could be a symptom of the lack of sexual freedom and judgment-free safe spaces available to people, especially women and queer individuals, to express their sexual needs comfortably.
That's a really good point.
This is where it's
Yeah.
coming out sort of sideways, is what they're suggesting, I think.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And, another thing that people bring up a lot is the idea of consent or the individual being complicit in the sexualization. For example, like you said with Magic Mike, Channing Tatum produced the films and all the actors involved would have known what was expected of them and of their characters before signing on. So it seems to me that it's like men are embracing that sexuality or their sexuality. And with the Buzzfeed episodes, people also point out that there is a degree of consent in terms of agreeing beforehand to read these thirst tweets. Unlike when Pedro Pascal, sort of ambushed on the red carpet, or when people publicly post extreme sexual fantasies about celebrities without knowing them.
Yeah, exactly. There is a sort of difference between those two. And there was an article in GQ that was titled "The Rabid Sexualization of Male Actors is Getting Creepy." And in addition to talking about this treatment of Pascal recently, it also included Paul Mescal from the TV show Normal People. And he'd actually described two experiences with fans that left him feeling objectified. And these were in-person experiences, so not just on the internet. So the Irish actor, he recalled meeting a woman who referenced his show, Normal People. And she said to him, "I didn't think the show was any good, but I saw your willy and I have a photo."
Oh,
This was just a stranger who'd come up and said that
okay.
to him. And number two, he also revealed an experience where a woman, he was taking a photo with her outside the London Almeida Theatre, where he was currently starring in a streetcar named Desire. And he was taking a fan photo with someone who'd asked him. And the woman actually groped his bum as they posed for the photo. And he said, "I remember tensing up and feeling just like fury." And then in 2015, Kit Harrington, who, burst onto the scene as Jon Snow in Game of Thrones, he spoke about, he said, "Young men do get objectified and they do get sexualized unnecessarily. With every photo shoot I ever go to, I'm told to take my shirt off." And he also described it as demeaning to be put on a pedestal as a hunk. But when he spoke out about this, instead of people taking him seriously for raising this, I mean, he was widely mocked. There was even an op ed in the Telegraph that said, "We're getting out the world's tiniest violin," which you would definitely not get that response to a woman if she spoke out about feeling uncomfortable in these sort of situations.
Absolutely not. And he's not the only one. Other male celebrities have also spoken out about feeling uncomfortable being objectified, including Richard Madden, Sam Claflin, Matt Smith, Rob Lowe, and even Henry Cavill, who said, this is quite incredible. "I mean, if a girl shouts something like, 'Oi, love, fancy a shag,' to me as I walk past, I do sometimes wonder how she'd feel if a builder said that to her. Although, of course, I wouldn't feel physically threatened as she might." And this goes back to your point earlier about the power dynamics, that somehow because
Yeah.
they're bigger, it's okay to do it.
Yeah, exactly. And, he recognizes that himself, but it's also, why should he have to deal with that on a day-to-day basis? I think another quite recent example is this thing where they talk about the BDE, the big dick energy, and particularly in
I
relation I
don't
know.
get it. It's so weird.
And they talk about that specifically with Pete Davidson, it's come up a lot. And they regularly talk about, this must be the reason why he's able to date such high profile women. So, for example, there was a comment that said, "First he was engaged to Ariana Grande and now he's dating Kim Kardashian. I don't get it. In my opinion, he's average looking at best and his comedy is just okay. Someone make this make sense to me." And again, I mean, they basically have reduced him down to just a single appendage, almost like his entire value is due to sexual prowess. And so there was a comment on the Daily Mail that said, "Pete's a real knight. He's wielded his sword through a lot of Hollywood," which was just a bit icky, you know?
It's a little bit funny though. Sorry.
Funny and icky, yeah.
It's almost like people can't imagine attraction being about someone's personality, or that just because one person doesn't appeal to you personally doesn't mean that they're not very attracted to another person. But to be clear, we're not saying it's not okay to be sexually attracted to celebrities because my whole childhood would be over.
Yeah, our lives. No, I mean, definitely not. We're definitely not saying that. I mean, it's really about the line, isn't it? And we've talked about a line before, but the problem with the line is it's entirely subjective. So, where is that line between what's essentially healthy attraction and what's just going too far, and is inappropriate? So, I mean, one of the biggest things people say in response to this when people bring up the Pedro Pascal meme and criticize it, is they say, oh well, he started it and he's played into it and he's encouraged it and therefore it must be okay. So for example, there was a comment that said, Pascal is no fool. He's extremely self-aware about the image he projects both on and off the screen and is having an absolute ball with it. But what I think is really important to note is it's really hard to tell if he started out playing along in good humor and then he never expected it to become so all-consuming. And also if there's a point at which, as part of the PR machine and all the things that are resting on it, do you feel like you have to play along so that you don't get cancelled? So it's quite hard to know how much those different things are playing a role.
Yeah, like you said, if you just turned around, and said, look, I've had enough of it, that could be in itself like a whole
Yeah.
backlash, right?
Yeah.
Hard to know. And I think this is summed up really well in a post I read on Reddit, which was our last episode, by the way. We love Reddit now. We're obsessed with it. I've been reading cats asking for legal advice again. But I found this comment. There's a real chicken and egg problem here that's hard to address. I'm not necessarily blaming him, but when an attractive older male star gets put into the PR promotion machine, they often get put in the daddy-like role, the same way young musicians and actors get put in the whore Madonna role, think early 2000s Britney. I think it's hard to break that mold, and unless the male star is especially PR savvy, his image will be daddified. Not to mention, PR teams do encourage this sometimes, but it's clear it gets out of hand very quickly. And I think that's probably what's happening here with Pascal, as someone who's spent 2 decades trying to break into the industry, to be finally having his moment. It must feel great. And in a way, like you said, he's leaning into that. And, in the internet's sort of obsession with him, and even humoring it. And it could easily feel like, well, it's better than not getting any parts and not being able to pay my rent.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's definitely something to bear in mind. And also that just more than one feeling can exist at once. So, I mean, for myself, I often have conflicting feelings. If a man finds me attractive or compliments me, I can feel both flattered and validated on one hand, and also objectified if it feels like it's entirely surface level, or if my boundaries are being completely ignored in the way that they're expressing their attraction. So both of those things can exist at once, right?
Oh, totally. And I can really relate to that. Like when I was waitressing when I was younger, like I was probably about 17 or 18, but these men in the hotel I worked in were constantly saying, oh, look at that jailbait, look at that arse. Like maybe I'm going too far, but I had men I felt really preyed on at that age.
Yeah.
But when it was constant and I was studying my A levels, like it's not like I'm gonna
Mm.
turn around and say, "Oh, I've just read Jane Eyre, who would like to discuss it with me?" But they
Yeah.
were just like literally, and I'm telling you, I'm just an average looking woman, but the way those men treated me, I felt like just a piece of meat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, part of me loved it a little bit. I did like it a little bit.
Yeah.
I didn't feel scared of them. I just felt like I didn't like the feeling that it was all that I was about. They didn't care
Yeah.
about who I was.
But I think that's natural as well. I mean, no matter what we sort of consciously believe, we've grown up completely saturated in these messages, particularly as women, but I think all people nowadays, that our entire worth comes from someone else finding us sexually appealing, that someone finding us attractive is where we get validated from. So even if we don't believe that, like, on an intellectual level, we are primed to have that automatic reaction if someone finds you attractive, and also to feel sort of invisible if some people
Mm.
aren't finding you attractive. And so there is an element sometimes where it's almost like, I know I shouldn't feel this way, but I want to be seen, but I don't want to be seen. It's just such a,
Mm.
mayhem. It's confusing. Also, another area of confusion I think comes in with, I mean, there've been times where I want to embrace my sexuality and I believe I have every right to, and it can feel empowering. But I can have those feelings and at the same time worry, oh, well, what will this mean if I do that? Will I then have to deal with other people interpreting that as sort of, oh, well, I can treat you however you want now because you've opened that door.
Yeah.
So I do think an important point in this is agency. And just because someone embraces their sexuality, it doesn't really give permission for others to aggressively project their own sexual desires onto that person, whether it's verbally or physically, and especially if there's no consent. That's something that seems to happen a lot in parasocial relationships. And, you mentioned that term in a previous episode where it refers to a relationship that a person imagines having with another person whom they don't actually know. So, this is particularly happens a lot with actors and celebrities and through technology. But just because someone's not doing it directly to someone's face, they somehow think that the normal boundaries don't really apply.
Exactly. And on Reddit, someone said, I feel like people just have no sense of shame these days, combined with a very weird lack of boundaries that lockdown only exacerbated. We've seen it with singers like Mitski and even Lorde at concerts, who wants to sing instead of just having fans scream mommy at them the entire time. Time and place, people. And this comment, yeah, like it's funny to joke about online, but maybe don't say this shit to an actor's face. I don't know why people don't understand that some things should just stay in group chat.
So true. We've barely scratched the surface of this topic because there's so much we could talk about. But for today, what are your final thoughts?
It's really hard to know where to start with this one. As some of the comments we read out have outlined, it can be hard to know exactly where the line is being crossed between appreciating male sexuality and then crossing over into objectification. And Pedro Pascal, yes, he's an attractive older man who's having his rightly deserved moment right now. And I think it's only natural that many people are attracted to him, especially when he's playing appealing characters, as we discussed earlier on, like the father role in The Last of Us. As in everyday life, I think what can start as a joke or a throwaway comment through the power of the internet and social media, can snowball into epic proportions. As with Pascal, it suddenly becomes the only thing people want to talk about, and they get reduced into a reductive role.
Absolutely. And it's also so easy for people to build up parasocial relationships these days. And having a celebrity crush is perfectly normal, as we've said. But because of the distancing power of the internet, it can also be incredibly easy to forget that what you're posting is actually going out into the world. And it could actually be seen by the object, who is a real person and not just a fantasy. Women have been on the receiving end of this for years. But while it had always been more subtle towards men, it now feels like it's reached sort of very overt levels. And despite the unequal power dynamics at play in our society and the usual explanation of, oh, it's just a joke, it still doesn't make it okay to reduce men down to mere sex objects in the same way as it's not okay to do that to women. It's also particularly heightened when the media themselves get in on the action and actually fuel it for their own purposes. And it's very hard to know whether the actor is just playing along because they're afraid of the backlash if they don't. If they say, actually, this is making me feel uncomfortable now. Sexuality is great, and there's a time and a place for it. But if that's the only thing a person is reduced to, well, it must get quite exhausting and ultimately demoralizing. And the problem with so many things in this world is working out where the line is when things cross over from healthy into unhealthy, especially as everyone's line is different.
And I just want to round it off with this comment on Reddit that sums up the role of the media in this process. Almost all this rhetoric is for profit by outlets like newspapers, social media, etc., trying to get the ad impressions. I think we need to primarily take on these big sites, papers and magazines, Instagram, socials, etc., that saw a cute daddy meme and then went crazy on it to make money. Now they'll write articles shaming us like we are somehow responsible for all of this, thus double dipping into the controversies they create. Esquire is now taking on the profitable anti-daddy stance, when I'm sure before they were happy to daddify male celebrities when that was profitable. Thank you for listening.
See you soon.
We want to say 2 very special thank yous this week. One goes out to my very good friend Claire. Thank you for suggesting this week's episode and all your support. And also to my dear friend Kush for his insights and tips for making this episode. Thank you to our lovely producer Emily. If you enjoyed today's episode, please don't forget to leave a review and subscribe. It really does help us in reaching more people.
Also, you can follow us on Instagram at Straight to the Comments Podcast. Our handle is S2TC Podcast. And join us next week where we'll be diving headfirst straight to the comments. See you there. This podcast has been produced by Emily Crosby Media.